So for this lesson, my goal is to go over the basics of light changes for Lightwave 2018 from previous editions. We'll stop at the basics for this lesson and then address more complicated issues on subsequent lessons. So to begin, it's important to realize in 2018, unlike previous editions of Lightwave, where you could go into the light properties directly and just start adjusting, you need to go first to render properties to global illumination. Global illumination has changed, and in the past this was something that was always on, but it was on at like 5%, so it was very minimal. You didn't really notice it. It was just kind of like a general fill light to sort of fill in shadows. Now, it's changed quite a bit. Its quality has changed, and so it's much better, but it is, again, a very specific tool for specific needs. So my recommendation is to typically turn it off, but let's turn it on and see what it does. So when you have it on, first let me turn off my existing light in the room. So this is nothing on in the room. All the lights are off except for the global illumination. So as you can see, the character is illuminated, the shadows are filled, although very noisily, but there's no real shadow presence in the room. It looks very flat, and this flat lighting could be great if you're doing the initial phases of an animation and you just want to be able to see the room and the props and everything and just set it up and create the motion. So this could be a good place to start with your scene before you set up your serious lights, but I certainly wouldn't be happy rendering in most conditions in something like this. Now, if you change the rays, you will get an increase in quality. So let's do a quick test for render purposes. I'll render the frame and you'll see the results, what this would look like. So that would be very quick render because we have low quality GI or global illumination, but you see how noisy it is, but it was fast. So for test renders, this would be great. This would be fine for your initial setups. But if you want to use this seriously and you want it to make it look good, so you can increase the number of rays and then hit render frame, and then you'll get a very different result. Although you will, of course, take longer to render. You're going to see the shadows filled in with a much smoother result. And so we're going to lose a lot of that dust and sand that we see in there. But again, it's slow. So again, this could be very useful for initial phases, or if you have a particular scene that this works for without any additional lights, you could use it. Of course, there's no law that says you have to use it alone. You can use this with lights to fill in shadows, and so you can use it as a general fill for your scene if you find it works for you. So you see the difference between this and the previous render, much better. Okay, so anyway, the setting before that refers to the intensity. So this is what you'd want to adjust if you were going to combine it with other lights. So say, for example, you put this at a low setting, like 25. You can do it like a general fill. Maybe that's a little too low. Let's see. Let's try that. But, well, let me turn the light back on first. So I'm going to turn my key light on over here. And so that's going to be my main light for my character. But now I can use this as a complementary fill. Oops, those rays are a little too expensive. Let me turn that down to, I don't know, like 3. Just for speed purposes. And then intensity, let's try like 45. Okay, so you see what's going on. Let's test the difference here. So you can see in VPR mode that those shadows are being filled in. This is what it would look like without it. This is the fill that you get with it. So just enabling this can fill in those shadows for you on a global level. It does fill in all the shadows though, and so it may be practical or it may prove to get in the way of other parts of your frame that you're trying to render. So anyway, just know that it's there for you if you want it, but you do need to be aware that it's turned on by default. Okay, so I'm going to turn that off so we can explore more accurately the changes in the looks of the other lights. And so let me just move my camera back a little bit so I can see the floor more. I don't know how he got off the floor, but let's put him back down. Okay, and so we're going to need to adjust the camera a little more. Let's go to the right, and I want to go down some so we can see that. There we go. All right, so I've added reflectivity to the floor, and that also has changed. This is not a lesson on the surface editor, but just so you're aware that now instead of the reflection setting that was there in the past, this is how it looked before, where you had reflection as a channel. Now the default is to have this principled BSDF setting, and here you would do it with specular. So you would use that specular setting to create that. And you can see it looks quite different when I switch over to this because the parameters are completely different. But this is a whole nother topic. So let me go back to standard so you know. If you need your surfaces to go back to the way they were for legacy purposes, for you people are more comfortable the way it was, this is where you can do that. And so, all right. I've got some reflection, some specular in that floor. Let me just go to the floor so we can see it. That's what the floor looks like. And this is what, under standard, if I want that reflection to come back, I would have to type it in here. So there we go. Okay. So let's move the surface editor out of the way for now. Let's focus back on the lights. So I've called this light my key. I've only got one light in the scene. It's now active here in my scene editor. You can see it's been turned back on. It's important to notice that the global illumination does not appear in the scene editor. That's only available through the render properties window. So just remember that. Okay, so now as I go through this, the next big jarring change is the light intensity. You notice is no longer under the percentage settings. It used to be percentages. It would default to 100 for your first light and then 50 to your subsequent lights. Now it's done in lux values, LUX or LX for short, which are, this change was designed to give a more consistent look to different surfaces with different lighting environments. And what we need to know, if you're coming from an older version, is that 100% on the old system is equivalent to 3.14 LX. Okay, so if you want 100% settings, that's what you'd go for. If you want something less intense than that, then you're more than welcome to explore shorter values or lower values. And here we go. We can now also go above that as well. So nothing's really changed. You still have a number scale. It's just that it's a very different number scale than what we saw before. But again, if you want the equivalent of 100%, it would be starting there. And that's why it does default to that setting when you first open it, 3.14 lux. And so next up, your intensity fall off is changed as well. Now you've only got one option when it comes to that setting. And so your intensity is now going to fall off based upon the position of this light. If I move it further away, it's going to get darker. If I move it closer, it's going to be brighter. So the default setting is off, which will just give you an infinite light source that just keeps going. But the other settings related to the area light are much as they were. So for example, the area light can be scaled, it can be rotated, it can be moved. So when you scale an area light in the past, what happened was it would change the quality of the shadows. So you would get very diffuse shadows or very sharp, direct shadows depending on the size of the light. And so if I were to take this light and just go to modify size, I could then see the results of those shadows by using my mouse, just going down. And let's go a little bigger. All right, so you see how focused the shadow is now that I've gone with a very small light source. So if I go bigger, you'll notice the shadows get very diffused. But the other difference is that if you go bigger, your light now gets brighter. And when I go small, it'll actually get darker. The smaller the light, the less it'll emit. Unless you turn normalize on, in which case it deactivates the scale in that setting. So just know that if you turn normalize on, it's gonna change your light intensity quite a bit. So if you have VPR on and you're scaling your light, rotating it, setting it up, then you know what you're going to get. It is consistent with it. I will say that the VPR is now even more consistent with final renders than it was before, because they have rewritten the code for that, and so it's really a lot closer to what you'd expect it to be when you finally render. Lens flares haven't changed. They're still there. Shadows, you can turn them on and off, although I believe by default the shadows are turned off now. So when you add more lights, you're not going to get a bunch of extra shadows unless you turn them on. So that's could be good or bad depending on how you like to work. You still have your objects panel for turning off certain objects. All right, let's go back to the basic tab. So lens flare hasn't changed. It's still there. If you want to add a lens flare, you can and adjust those options. Effect volumetrics has changed, and so now you don't have a volumetrics button the way you did before. You just have this button, which then relates and ties into this panel on the render properties for volumetrics. So you have to enable it here as well. Now, I'm not going to get into this right now because it's going to distract us from our core topic. So just know that it has changed and that it's still there, but it's very different. So the next up is the area settings, which have changed as well. Now you can add an image to your area light, which before was only possible with a spotlight. So if I have a photo, I can then add that to my area light, and you can see it cast this green look. We don't know what the area light looks like, so let's take a look. I'm going to reveal the photo. If I can bring this close enough to the camera, be able to see it. All right, so this is yet another new feature with lights, and all lights can do this now. You can now turn on visible to camera. So now every light's physical attributes will be visible. So I can see not only the light, but also the image in the light. Now, the multiple important samples, or MIS samples, this number refers to the quality of the image. So in theory, I should be able to get much better resolution and make that image look a little sharper. There we go. The image is being distorted to make it fit on this light, so it's not going to look great, but it's, in theory, more sharp. But this refers to the quality of the image that you're mapping. So if you're not mapping anything, it doesn't do anything. Okay. So the samples, this will improve the quality of your shadows on your floor that you get with your light. And so you can crank this up or turn it down. Let's see, I think that's it for what we want to talk about now. Well, I skipped 2 buttons. Let me talk about normalize first. Well, we talked about normalize, I believe, but normalize again cancels out the effect of the scale of the light. So when we talked about scaling now, that increases the intensity of the light, you can deactivate that with normalize, and so it will basically cancel that and refer to the number value instead. Portal lighting. Okay, portal lighting is something that I have attempted to make work, and I have failed so far. So I'm not the right one to tell you about this, but I will say that from what I understand and what I've read, what I've been told is that this light is supposed to turn a light like this into a conduit for getting exterior lights from outside of space into the interior. In other words, rather than just having that light spill into the room randomly and fill in shadows or what have you, the light would then be guided by the rotation and the scale of this particular light, therefore negating the intensity altogether and just acting as a portal to get the light. Let's say there's a distant light outside your house or your room or something, your car, whatever it is, and then this would guide the light rays to where you want them to get good quality fill light or light coming through from the outside. Now, I have not been able to get this to work as I just described it to you, so I won't even attempt it. I'm not sure if there's still bugs with the Mac version or if I'm just not getting accurate information as to what it really does or how it works. So I will just skip it. But anyway, hopefully I'll figure that out and can readdress that issue soon. Let's go next to the N-GON light. I'm just going to skip to this one because it's the same as the area light, except for you can choose sides. And so when it's visible, let me move this into place just so we can see it. And let me scale it down because you can't really tell what shape it is. That's a little easier to see, I hope. All right. So right now it's a circle because I've chosen 0 sides. But if you have less than 3 sides, that's what it'll do. If you have 3 sides, it becomes a triangle, etc., etc. You can do a pentagon, whatever. But I just want to point this out because all the features on this are identical to the area light now. And that was not the case in the past, but it is now. So let me turn off normalize. But anyway, N-GON. The distant light, as you know, is an infinite light source that has the ability to change rotation, but not change when you move it. So whenever you move the area light, the distant light, it would stay intact. But when you rotate it, it will emulate the rotation of that light, the angle of that light. But when I move it, nothing happens because it's an infinite light source. All right. So, a few things. First of all, you cannot have the light fall off because, yes, it is an infinite light source, so that's not there. You do have the same lux settings and all that, color. But the only thing that's really changed with this is the fact that now you have an angle. And so the angle of the light can be changed, which will also affect the quality of the shadows. So if I change this to, I don't know, 180, maybe that's too much. Let's go to like 30. Let me turn off normalize as well. And let's see. Let me just double check my rotation on this and see to make sure it's pointing correctly. I want to see the floor. And turn off my edit nodes, and I want to crank this up. Okay, so that's a little too bright. Go back to my distant light. Okay. So I've noticed this bug on a few occasions, and I'm not sure why it happens. It's very annoying, but I'm hoping it's just a temporary thing. If your light does this and stops projecting, the only way I found to clear it is to change the light type and go back. So I'm hoping that this is just something that is happening on my computer, not everybody's, but it is frustrating for sure. I will attempt now to go back and change the angle once more, and it doesn't seem to be doing anything for me. So I'll go ahead and skip it for now. It's frustrating, but yeah, not getting anywhere with it. All right, let me turn this back down. Okay. So we can see the hole in the window is creating this light element that's coming through, but the shadows, as soon as I change the angle, are all of a sudden gone. And I can try increasing the samples. I don't think that should make a difference, but yeah, same results. Okay. Anyway, moving on. Good to know they're adjusting these lights. I just hope it works at some point. So the linear light. The linear light now has the ability to change the length, the size, and the ability to be visible, of course, like other lights. And so if I take this light in, we should be able to see it. Let me just scale it up. So it's visible. and then the length as well. So it's basically like a tube of light. Let me take the size down a little bit. So it's a lot more customizable than it was. And the fact that you can view it now makes it easier to adjust and see what's going on with it. You can have ends on the end of it so it's not hollow. But if you're confused or you don't remember this light from before, you never used it, it's basically like a bunch of point lights all put together. So it has the same properties as point lights. You can adjust the intensity fall off. The other settings are more or less the same. The samples for shadows can be adjusted so you can get better quality. And that's about it. So you can normalize this one as well. It is scalable. That's the area light. And as you can see, it's quite intense when it gets big. So I'd have to scale this down quite a lot to make it practical. Maybe even take down the length. And there it looks a lot better. It's still too bright, but hey, we can do that with the intensity as well. So as you get a feel for these lights, just remember it's a balance. If you don't normalize the lights, it's a balance between, for some of these, the scale and the intensity. All right, let's move on. So photometric and environmental lights are very specific and more advanced format lights, and so I will get into those on other lessons. The point light is, again, just like the one I showed you with the linear. It's just that it's smaller, so we can't scale it. You'd have to adjust all the intensity here, so there's no normalize button because there is no scale. Let's see what else. There is an intensity fall off, as I mentioned. And this light, if you remember, it responds to the position of the object, but it does not. The rotation of this light has no effect. All right, let's see what else we got. Okay, the primitive light is a brand new light. And what this is it means that you can have a physical light that is basically an object in the shape of an object. So it gives you the opportunity to have, say, for example, a neon light. Rather than just using luminosities, textures, to make it look like it's glowing, you could actually now have that as a physical light. So just to demo this, I'll show you quickly how it works. You go to primitive. These settings are all the same. Where it changes is down here. You have to choose an object that's loaded into your scene already. So that object doesn't have to be used in any other capacity, but it does need to be loaded into your scene. So here it is. I have these objects that I can choose from. I'll just make one out of the chair. It's not going to turn my chair into a light, but it will make a light that's shaped like the chair. So at this point, there's my light, and I need to make it visible and on camera. So let me physically move it over, and then I'll start to scale it so you can see it better. So there it is. It looks like it's upside down. I can rotate it. Before I scale it, let's see what I got going on. Oh, it looks good. All right, let's scale it. So let's go to size. And there it is. So that's an actual light. It basically responds like the linear or the point light. Like as you can see, I can scale it, so the size will impact the intensity of the light. I'll just demo that again. Here we go. All right, so what else we have here? Spherical. Okay, with the spherical light, we have the round light that we can then scale. So I will increase this. There it is. It can be moved, it can be positioned. The settings up here are the same. We can project an image on this as well, so we can have the forest come back as a sphere. And it can be normalized as well, or use the size to determine the intensity of it. So, we have to do it here. So there's a darker light, there's a brighter light, or you normalize it. All right, we're down to just the spotlight. The spotlight is more or less the same. It has changed a little bit. I won't go over the parameters here again because they're the same, but the cone angle is still there. The soft edge angle is still there. Now you can control the number of samples in terms of the quality with this light. You can project like you could before. And you can scale it. So let me just go with something more intense. Let me just go with a more intense light here. Let's go. And so it'll give us a stronger shadow. Let me just rotate this. I'm going to rotate downwards so we get more. Okay. Let me turn that projection image off too. It's a bit distracting and it's not really proving anything. Okay, so let's now change the size. So you see how the shadow changed when I changed the size of the light, but let me just go now to 0, and now go back to 30. Look at the light, the shadow that Stu is casting. I'm not talking about the edge of the spot, which is the soft edge angle, but you notice that Stu casts a very different type of shadow. Let me just slowly kind of creep backwards, and you see how it's becoming more focused. So we're getting area quality lights, well, light shadows that we would associate with the area light from before, and now they can be applied to the spotlight as well. So it's definitely gotten better, it's definitely improved, and there you go. So that's a quick overview of the basic changes in the light types, and hopefully that will get you up and running to at least to start exploring on your own with lightwave and understanding the basic differences now with these new features.